Alright guys, hope you're all keeping safe, and it is Friday, so yeah, I'm excited because, you know, no work obviously, and always look forward to the weekend. It's always nice to go out, not work, and see your family and that. But today I've got some news that you guys are probably going to want to hear about, because there's been confirmation of at least one huge change with Title Update 11, along with others worth talking about in this one, including how the 60% minimum for rolls on gear actually works, because it does work slightly different to how I interpreted the information, and probably how you guys did as well. If you enjoy this one, please drop a like down below, subscribe, and let's begin. So guys, over the last kind of 24 hours, Bruce has been busy on Twitter answering kind of lots of questions about TU 10.1. A lot of those questions are around the riot foam and other sorts of things, but now more importantly, what we can expect from Title Update 11, at least with some of the changes that he's mentioned. We don't have any kind of date at this point for TU11, although I suspect it's either going to kind of be late August or early September, and we don't really know exactly what the whole premise of TU11 will be yet, although I suspect a lot more PvP changes will be coming, and that's based on the fact there's a Reddit post at the moment basically just talking about PvP, and I also think the devs will be focusing on more specific changes, especially how they can find a happy medium with rainbow rolls, and how do they look to address the riot foam within PvP. With that in mind, one big addition confirmed by Bruce and coming with Title Update 11 is the inclusion of ensnare and explosive resistance mods. Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to be happy about this. The question was raised by Brendan Sherry on Twitter, saying, a bit off topic, but could we get ensnare and explosive resistance mods? Only one brand set has that, and it's not enough. To which Bruce responded saying, yep, it's on the list. Now this is very, very welcome news, and this is something I think a lot of people have been talking about for, again, quite a long time. Explosive resistance mods are important for obvious reasons, but for PvP players, the idea of ensnare resistance mods is probably very welcome, although I do think this means little will be done to actually address the riot foam chem launcher in itself, and this has been confirmed by the devs on Twitter, who state that right now they're just going to see how it works out with these additional changes, and a further change may be made in the future. Now there is a further change that I want to get into, one of which is huge for the game. So moving on to probably the biggest news in this video. On the subject of riot foam, Bruce was again talking about further changes coming with Title Update 11 when he said, I will likely be doubling the amount of hazard resistances gained from gear mods, and we plan on making all gear mods generic with TU11. No more red, blue, yellow mod slots. What? Now, I never expected these gear mod changes. I almost coughed at me reading that, but I never expected those gear mod changes to come at all. First off, doubling of hazard resistances gained from gear mods will be, again, another very welcome change. Like most things, it's kind of like a fine balance. Certainly in a PvP environment where players who love using status effect builds will probably not be happy so much, because it's kind of a nerf with this in mind, but those who don't, they're going to be very, very happy. From a PvE perspective, any way that we can reduce income and status effects is always going to be great. So overall, I'm happy with the change, and I do think there needs to be better places to get hazard protection. Like, you have to fully invest into hazard protection if you really want to get the benefit from it. Whereas this kind of change means that if you throw on some mods, you're going to have a good resistance to that stuff without having to fully spec into hazard protection. More importantly for me, no more red, yellow, or blue mod slots with TU11, and this is a pretty huge change actually, because it's not something that I thought anyone was really talking about. I've not seen anything about this, but why this is a huge change? Well, further, it's going to reduce the RNG required to get the roll that you want on your gear. So rather than having, saying, another recal slot, they're just going to remove the requirements for mods. So now you only need to, get the minor attribute and the major attribute, or the one major attribute and the two minor attributes, unless it's obviously a gear set where it's 1 and 1, to get the gear that you want. So it does kind of remove 25% of RNG there, which is good. Now, I don't know if this is an attempt to make rainbow rolls less common, although I don't think that alone works. As for most rainbow drops I get, it's the attributes, not the mods, that make it rainbow rolls. In fact, most of the time the mods that I get are perfectly fine. It's normally the minor attributes that I have to change around. To be honest, I've been thinking about this change since I read about it yesterday, and aside from less RNG, I'm not too sure what this change is going to achieve, so we'll have to wait for what the devs say about this. Now, I've previously spoken about adding mods to the Recal library, and that's still very much possible with this change in mind. But I'd hope the devs would really consider how mods work in the current game, because I think they still need to be revisited. Now, I'm mainly talking about skill mods rather than gear mods, which I think are fine where they are. Maybe aside from how often they drop and how it feels like it's impossible to kind of get a max rolled mod. Maybe the devs could consider looking into both these things with Title Update 11. Let me know what you think in the comments to this change with mods. Like I said, unless I'm missing something, this is just going to take another layer of RNG out of the game, which for a lot of people is going to be good. For some people, certainly hardcore people, it might not be as a good thing. So it's really going to do is make it more likely for us to get the gear that we want. But I also just want to say that I don't want the devs to go too far and remove all of the RNG from the game, especially when there's no real content. If you've got loads of content and you're reducing the RNG a little bit, it's okay. But when the vast majority of people in the game are grinding for gear as their reason to play the game, removing RNG is not a good thing, because then no one's, people are going to get the stuff they want quicker, and then they're going to stop playing. And I think that's where we're at with the Division 2 currently. I think that most people are playing, the game to grind for gear. So I'm not concerned about this change at all, because you still got to have a lot of RNG to get the role that you want. I'm just concerned if they keep going down this route. That's my only real concern. Next up, and a change that might be coming with Title Update 11. I say might because it's not confirmed yet. But Suspicious Pixel on Twitter tweeted to Bruce saying, "Is it possible to remove the weapon restrictions from each specialization? What is the purpose of limiting to 3 weapon types?" Which is a fair point. To which Bruce responded saying, "I think it's one of those things that makes sense initially when first unlocking a specialization, but becomes more of an inconvenience later on, rather than a meaningful choice long term. I'm in favour of removing the limitation given the current implementation." So, whilst it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be getting this change with TU11, what it does mean is the devs agree having the limitation of 3 weapon types per specialization doesn't really make sense anymore, and is more of an inconvenience than anything. So I totally agree with. So this is, I think this is good news if they make this change. On another note, I kind of miss signature skills from the Division. Do any of you guys? I really do, to be honest. They were easy to use. They made a huge difference to gameplay, especially when they were activated at the right time. So they did require some skill. Were useful in PvP, some I think the current specialization weapons themselves lack. And for those reasons, I miss them. I rarely ever use my actual specialization weapon. And whilst I know the devs are not going to change the whole system, I do hope they further review and refine the specialization weapons. And if there's a Division 3, then I hope that they maybe go back to what we had in the Division. Now, moving on, in my last video, I talked about how I thought the changes to loot with Title Update 10.1 were great, having experienced a real difference in the loot I had dropped from just 2 control points. Now, that's still very much the case after playing more. Since then, there's no doubt about that. With that said, I did have a very low attribute roll drop. And I want to show you the piece of gear, along with the discussion with the devs around this low roll particularly, because I suspect a lot of you are going to have this happen to you and will probably ask the same questions. And this is here to answer those questions. It's very informative. And yeah, just check this out. So guys, this is the conversation that I had with the devs. So as you can see, my piece here, I'll just show you the piece of gear. As you can see, my weapon damage roll is at like, I don't know, 30%, something like that. So I was confused, because in my opinion, that shouldn't happen. Based on what they showed us in State of the Game, around rolls being at 60% as kind of like a minimum, I didn't think this should happen. Mind you, this is on Heroic, and this is from a control point chest. So what I said was, Trick, hey, this is a roll pulled from the Brooklyn Bridge control point in Heroic. Should the weapon damage attribute be that low? Thanks. And then Johan responded, overall, that's a really good roll if you look at the other 2 attributes. I will let Trick speak to the specifics, but I personally don't see an issue with this particular drop. My response, my issue is based on the graph provided within last State of the Game. The minimum roll on a heroic piece of loot was about 60%. This weapon damage roll is way below that, unless the 60% is based on all of the attributes combined rather than individual stats. So my thing was that when I saw the graph, each individual stat would be minimum 60% on heroic. But my concern with this was that actually maybe it doesn't work like that. Maybe it takes all of it into account and then is 60% of the overall amount. So Trick put, my understanding is that the minimums were per roll, but this is well outside of my wheelhouse. Bruce, can you shed light on this? Are the roll drops from heroic checkpoints guaranteed a 60% minimum on each roll? or is that only a subset of drops? And then basically it says, let's get it over to Nikki. When we talk minimum percentages, we mean the overall average of all rolls. It's like saying the item itself is of power X percentage, and the attributes distribute accordingly. So the item we're showing is valid because you get 2 great rolls and 1 weaker, averaging at about 75%, which is what I thought it might be after seeing this roll, but what I didn't know when they showed us the graph from last time. So if you look at this, say these were out of 100, okay, so these two are pretty much 100. So if we take these 3 rolls here, that's 300, okay? These two are 100 each, and this one's maybe 30. So that's 230, which is, yeah, way over 60% of 300, yeah? So what, 60% is 180. So it's way above that. So overall, this is above the 60% minimum. It's just this roll is way below. And this is what I didn't know, and this is what didn't come across in the state of the game, and I think a lot of you guys might not know this as well. And it says here, also the 60% from my presentation was just to illustrate the point. These minimum percentages differ per difficulty and are higher than 60% on heroic, and of course even higher on legendary. I did ask what is the percentage for each tier. As I typed above, it's higher than 60%, and that was even the case for heroic before TU 10 point burn. But with some new tweaks, it's also now less likely that stuff drops at the absolute minimum, which is true. But at this point, we don't know exactly what the minimum is for heroic. I'm going to say it's about 70%. Challenging is probably about 60, hard is probably 50, legendary is probably 80 or above. But I just wanted to point this out, guys, because you may come across pieces of gear where you see this and go, wait there, I thought the minimum was meant to be 60%. And it is, or whatever the percentage is for the difficulty you're playing, and it is. But it's for the overall piece, not for each individual attribute. But that's it for today's video, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you all have a fantastic weekend. And until next week, Epic out.